mean,
Welcome to the 13th installment in the living history of Bill Thomson. I'm Rolendra, and I'm interviewing my father, Bill Thomson, about his experiences and memories from his life and history. Welcome, Dad.
hi,
Hi.
fire away.
Well, last time we were discussing the period of time in the early 70s.
Uh-huh.
You had started your work as a professor at University of Idaho.
Yeah.
We discussed a little bit about how you had this position for a year in Southern California.
Southern California. I'm not following you there.
Yes, you had, I can't remember who you were working for. You were kind of working for a company.
Yeah. Unical.
Unical, right.
Right.
And then, yeah, you've got families living in the Blue House. You moved from the East 7th Street to the Blue House sometime in the early 70s.
Yeah, that's about the same time. Right. Right.
And you had Amy was born in 1969.
Uh-huh.
She would have been a toddler. And Paul and Leslie are in grade school.
Yeah, at West Park School
Uh-huh.
with the horrible principal, and I can't remember her name.
Okay. What was horrible about the principal?
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about the principal that was
Oh
horrible?
God. Oh yeah. Oh, it was awful. She did not like Paul at all.
Okay.
And both Paul and Leslie were going to school there. Do you remember where the school was?
I do,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, right by the park there, right before you go to the campus.
Right.
And so I think she called us in or something, your mom and I, and she started talking about how she wanted Leslie in some gifted and talented program or something like that,
Uh-huh.
because she had some kind of, I don't know, some kind of aptitude test, and apparently, Leslie had scored pretty high on it.
Uh-huh.
And your mom said, well, Paul took that test too, and he scored even higher.
Uh-huh.
And she said, oh, she didn't want Paul anywhere near her because Paul used to fight with her all the time.
Okay.
That's about all I can remember from there.
Uh-huh.
But she was horrible.
Yeah. Well, what else do you remember about those days? About the house, about the kids at that age?
Well, I can't remember what we had in the basement then. Over at some period of time, and I can't remember when, we put kind of like a bar down in the basement.
Uh-huh.
And Paul, I do remember Paul being old enough now, I can't remember what year this was, but he decided he was going to sleep in the bedroom downstairs. That way he could have privacy.
Uh-huh.
And so then it seems to me we had a pool table in that room. I can't remember it. But and then in the bar we had all kinds of stuff there. I remember one funny story about the bar.
Yeah.
Right over the bar, we had this big, what would you call it? It was basically a document that was framed that had named me whatever I was. Hold on, I got to look.
Okay.
Oh yeah, the Joint Service Commendation Medal.
Okay.
Anyway, so we put it up in the bar, and we were all, I think we had a student function, and we always had it down in the basement. And at one point, it was like 10 students all close over by the bar, and they're all laughing. And so I went, oh, I said, what's so funny? So they they pointed to the picture that was hanging up on the wall. And I said, what's funny about that? And then they looked and they pointed, it says, it's April 1st. He said, we couldn't believe you ever got anything like that until we realized it was a joke.
Okay.
Anyway, that's about what I remember from then.
Oh, I'm thinking maybe instead of a pool table, I remember we used to have a ping pong table. Is that what you're thinking of?
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember a ping pong table. Maybe we had one. I do remember the pool table.
We definitely had a ping pong table. Yeah.
It may have been. I don't remember.
Maybe there was a pool table and you traded it in for a ping pong table later. I'm not sure.
Well, or vice versa. Yeah, I can't remember.
Okay. Well, let's see. How was did you have friends? I know you've mentioned the Calverts. They were like neighborhood
No,
friends.
we're not friends with the Calverts.
You weren't friends.
Well, Susan Calvert was a real piece.
Uh-huh.
And so your mom, said, oh, this is neat. We got these two kids over there at the Calverts, same age as our kids,
Uh-huh.
But Susan Calvert, the mom, didn't want anything to do. She figured we were below her station.
Okay.
So there was this one family, the DuPonts. He was a psychiatrist or something like that.
Okay.
And maybe a mental health counselor. And when we had gone down to, I guess it was LA for a year on a sabbatical, and they rented our house. And then they got real friendly with the Calverts.
Okay.
And when we moved back, one thing that had happened is they took every light bulb in the house with them.
Uh-huh.
So we came back to a house with no light bulbs.
Yeah.
And this guy, he had a doctorate in psychology or something. So it was pretty bizarre. And of course, your mom was just really beside herself because of Susan Calvert, and then I can't remember whether they would go out. By this time, the DuPonts were living out in the country somewhere. And Susan Calvert would arrange for her two boys, who were the same age as Paul and Leslie, to go out there, but never Paul and Leslie, because they were below her station.
Okay.
Well, needless to say, your mom was not fond of this woman.
Right. Yeah.
And her husband, Jim Calvert, he was a case. I had him as a math teacher when I was in grad school. And so I knew of him, and he was actually a kind of an interesting guy. But he didn't have really much to do. His wife kind of ran everything else. And he mostly, I guess he smoked marijuana and did a lot of things like that. He was in his own world, but he was kind of funny, I thought.
Okay. But it seemed like the kids, they were kind of friends with the Calvert kids, even if like you didn't.
The DuPont kids?
Paul and Leslie.
Oh, yeah. They kind of were. But when the DuPonts rented our house while we were gone, they became as far as Susan Calvert was concerned, their dad was what was he? A psychiatrist? Not a psychiatrist. A counselor? I don't know, some kind of mental health guy, with an impressive degree of some sort.
Yeah.
And Susan Calvert really thought that was pretty cool. And so from that point on, Paul and Leslie, were just kind of average people as opposed to the beautiful people.
Okay, I see.
But when we got back, the people who rented our house moved out to the country, and that's so the Calverts started hanging out over there. They'd go out there, and so Paul and Leslie really had, no peers to really hang out with.
Okay. And this would have been around the time that my mom was working at the university newspaper.
Yes. And it was, I think she got paid something, or she just volunteered. I can't remember. But yeah, she would do some writing, and she would go and interview people. And and at one point, who did she interview? So somebody famous,
Okay.
and she did the interview, and she was kind of liking that job. But they were, well, you know how a university town is. You know, there's a hierarchy of who the beautiful people are,
Yeah.
and your mom didn't fit into that, and so it wasn't all that pleasant for your mom.
Right. And so at the time, was it correct that she was kind of thinking of going into journalism and writing,
Yes,
like,
yeah,
as a
she was
career?
taking courses in it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and she took a course from a woman, I can't remember her name now, but she really liked this woman who was a teacher at the U of I
Uh-huh.
and taught a writing course. And your mom took it, and of course did very well because she was really an excellent writer.
Yeah.
And so, but that never seemed to go anywhere. I don't think, since your mom didn't have any advanced degrees, the university kind of looked down their nose at her. So
Uh-huh.
she, so she never got anywhere with that.
And do you remember why she didn't continue? I mean, eventually she did continue taking a class here and there from the university, but
Yeah,
she
yeah,
didn't just go ahead and graduate.
no. She just took classes, and they were always, things like writing, and she didn't want to take it. Well, even Matt, even if you're going to do English and writing, you do have to take courses in other subjects.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And she, because of her experiences in school when she was younger, she really didn't want to do any of that, I think.
Okay.
So, uh, but fortunately, at that point, not only was I, have a professor appointment, but I was doing a lot of consulting. So,
Yeah.
uh, I had enough money to support us. She didn't need to work.
Right. But that's probably the first time she started to get kind of depressed, right? Was
The first time, what?
she started to get like pretty depressed?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think depression was always part of her.
Uh-huh.
Uh, I remember, I don't know how much you remember your grandfather, but he was not an upbeat person,
Yeah.
and basically, he raised her from the time she was a young teenager, and then he had this brother. I can't remember his name. Do you remember his brother's name? Lived in Tennessee.
There were two brothers. There was KO.
It's Kale. That's the one I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And then the other one had gone in the military. I can't remember. He wasn't very close to the other one, but Ko and Ko's wife,
Hmm.
um, and they interacted with us quite a bit. Uh,
Okay.
but that was the only one. And your grandfather. I remember when let's see, when we were in the Blue House, and your grandfather he was living close to us, like around the corner somewhere, and your mom dropped her. I don't know. It was a necklace or a ring, not a wet. We never had a wedding ring, so it wasn't a wedding ring. But anyway, so I called up your grandfather to see if he had some tools that I could get into the drain and get that out. I remember him saying, "Oh, fun time, isn't it, Bill?"
Uh-huh.
Because he was used to those things kind of happening all
Okay.
the time. Anyway, he and I actually got along pretty well.
Uh-huh. Let's see then. So in this time in the mid 70s, then I guess you had the first three kids,
Yeah.
and my mom was thinking of trying to get into this career and then got discouraged and kind of dropped out of it.
So say that again.
She was got discouraged with the journalism and the writing job.
Your mom?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so at that point, previously, had you thought that you were going to have more kids than just the three?
No, I don't remember even thinking about that, um, because I don't. let's see, I'm trying to remember where Katie was. Katie was born in California, I think. No, you were.
I was, yeah. She was
Yeah,
born in 1977.
yeah,
So
yeah.
here
So
in like 75,
yeah,
76, 70. So there's this period of time
yeah,
where it's
yeah.
not
She
really
was.
clear what's going to go on.
Yeah, she was born in Idaho,
Mhm.
and I don't remember why we decided to have her. I don't remember. For one thing, your mom, she didn't want to have any more kids because she was going to be this writer and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
that wasn't working out real well at the university. And even the mentor that she thought she had, was really an academic uh, and liked your mom, okay. But she got all involved in the mentor did in the university stuff. And
Okay.
your mom was kind of out of it. And it may have been your mom decided that maybe we should have some more kids because I think she's always looking for a role, that she could do. And, the kids had all turned out real well. So I think she felt like, maybe that's what she was cut out to do. But she really didn't have the patience for it as she got older.
Uh-huh.
And so anyway, that's how that developed.
Okay. Well, let's see. I remember you saying in 1976, the Yankees won the pennant for the first time
Uh-huh,
since 64.
uh-huh.
And then this is what prompted you to get a color television, right?
Right, right. Up to that, your mom was always pushing for it. And I said, "What difference does it make if it's in color?
Uh-huh.
This costs a lot of extra money." And
Yeah.
then the Yankees are in the World Series, so we got to get a color TV.
Okay.
I guess I was a little bit of a hypocrite. Well, maybe a big hypocrite.
Okay. Hmm. Well, anything else you can remember about that period of time before Katie was born?
I can't think other than your mom learning to drive. That was about that time,
Uh-huh.
and that was a real experience because I remember she told me that her dad had tried to teach her to drive and gave up.
Uh-huh.
But we were living. I think we must have been living on East 7th Street at that point, and so it was pretty not a lot of traffic or anything. So it was a good place for her to learn to drive. But she really, I don't know what it was. I don't think she was afraid, but it was almost like she had no coordination. And so all of a sudden, driving, nobody around, and all of a sudden she'd step on the brakes real hard and the car would stop with a jolt.
Okay.
And I was always riding, shotgun with her when she was learning. And then finally she just can't remember what it was, but I think she decided that her dad had tried to teach her to drive. I tried to teach her to drive. She finally decided that was the problem. Both of us were making her nervous. So she just taught herself the rest of it, and she did fine after that.
Okay. Well, moving on then to 77, that would have been when Katie was born.
Yeah.
So what do you remember about that?
Trying to remember. Was she born in Pullman?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Why? I'm trying to figure out why.
Well, as I remember, both her and Amy were born in Pullman. You told me once that there was like something about the hospital in Moscow that you didn't quite trust, or there was something
Yeah,
going on
yeah.
there.
The hospital in Moscow was really bad. The doctors were really bad.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think that's exactly why we went over there. And there was no extra cost. It was the same cost no matter where you were. And
Okay.
I had some kind of insurance from the university. And, they didn't, as long as they were accredited and what have you, they paid some share of that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the hospital in Moscow was awful.
Yeah. Well, as I remember hearing that when she came along, she's the fourth child, And it had been a big gap, so that it had been 8 years since Amy was born.
Between Leslie and Amy, yeah. I mean,
Uh,
Leslie and Katie, yeah.
or Amy and Katie, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and then maybe you had like a little more money by this point, so that this was a chance to really have a big, buy all the things for the child. And, kind of, this is what you've told me before in the past anyway, that it was a big,
That we began buying a lot of things for the kids. Is that for the
yeah, or like putting just like a lot of effort
yeah.
and attention into, here, we're going to
Yeah.
have this kid.
Well, by that time, money wise, we were a lot more solvent
Yeah.
because I had done a lot of consulting, and the consulting stuff was really, it paid very, very well, way
Mhm.
more than the university.
Yeah. And yeah, so then there was, so her name was Laura Catherine.
Yeah.
And do you remember how she was named?
There was a story behind that. I'm trying to remember it because I can't remember that because we called her Kate. I wanted Laura, I think.
Yeah.
And I can't remember why, but I liked the name. When when your mom was pregnant with her, and your mom decided, well, Laura Catherine, but then she began calling her Katie, and so everybody called her Katie from that point on. I think it was one of those incidents where your mom was trying to establish, that she had a more important role than I did in that part of the family.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what was behind all of that. But of course, I was clueless as usual, didn't realize it.
Uh-huh.
What do you mean, yeah?
I'm just not contradicting you. Well, how was it? How were the two of you getting along by this point? Because after a while, it started to get kind of contentious.
I was who getting along?
You and my mom.
It was okay. Katie was pretty young when we went down to LA.
Uh-huh.
What was I? I was on a sabbatical or something down there with
Well, that would
Unica.
have been in the Bay Area when she was young.
You're right. It was the Bay Area. I went to Stanford Research Institute,
Mhm.
and I had a sabbatical. So the sabbatical paid a certain percentage of my salary, and Stanford Research Institute agreed to make up the difference. So that's why we ended up there. I remember one funny story from that period of time.
Uh-huh.
So your mom was pregnant with you? Does that sound right? Yeah. And there was a big earthquake, and I was working at the Stanford Research Institute. It was just south of San Francisco,
Uh-huh.
and we had these really heavy, like 2-ton metal high pressure reactor covers. So when we were doing research, which was always under high pressure, and by high pressure I mean like 1,000 pounds, and so we had this big heavy steel thing that was up on a chain up on the roof, and when we went to do an experiment, we would lower it over the reactor, and bolt it all down. Well, it was up on the roof when the earthquake came, and here was this thing shaking, back and forth, and I'm looking up at it, and then I said, "Oh my God!" I told somebody, I said, "My wife is home and she's deadly afraid of earthquakes, and I better call and find out what happened." Well, your mom didn't know there was an earthquake because she was so wobbly from being pregnant.
Okay.
so so it worked out okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, so I remember there's some stories about Katie as very young, where she got like really sick. Do you remember this?
yeah, she did, and I'm trying to remember what it was. But you're right; she was very sick there for a while, and we were going. We didn't know anything about doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And Roger Corus, you remember him at all? The name? He
Hello.
taught at Idaho,
Yeah.
and your mom's and they had lived in the Bay Area, and so his wife gave us the name of a doctor who was a total yo-yo. And so Katie kept getting sicker because this doctor wasn't treating her right.
Uh-huh.
And I can't remember how she finally got out of it, but she was sick for a while. And it was getting a little bit scary.
Yeah, she was like really shutting down and stopped
Yeah, yeah,
talking and things like
yeah,
that.
yeah. And then I can't remember how she got out of it. I know we did switch doctors.
Uh-huh.
We found another doctor, but I don't remember exactly how she got out of it. But she did.
I remember you sharing the story that my mom kind of just took her around town with her to the same
Yeah,
locations over and
yeah.
over again,
What
to
your mom did, she decided that because Katie shut down.
yeah.
And so your mom just took her to all the places that she had always been before. It was really a good idea.
Uh-huh.
Your mom was extremely intelligent.
Yeah.
And her problem was her lack of self-confidence, you
Uh-huh.
know, and like look at her dad, and then her mom, I never met her mom, but she had died before I met her. But she told me that her mom dressed her up like little princesses and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
So that was a real downer when she lost her. And then her dad remarried Mrs. Borsey, I remember,
Uh-huh.
and she was just like a witch.
Okay.
I met her one time. Yeah, your grandfather had divorced her by that time, but oh brother, it was awful. So your mom had that experience, So
Yeah.
she didn't have a great childhood
Yeah.
because her mom died young, and then all of this upheaval, and so it's not no way for a kid to grow up.
Right. Um, and then other stories about Katie at that age. She had her own kind of language
Her
that she
what?
her own kind of language that she invented. She would create
Yeah,
names
yeah.
for
She
everything.
she she called things, and they bore no relationship to what they were, and I'd have to ask her, you know, what are you talking about? And she'd point at the object, and
Uh-huh.
then she use that word again, and that went on for I'd say 6 months anyway.
Uh-huh.
And she just made up her own language for every. Katie always wanted to be in control, but she didn't have the age yet where she had developed a language and a memory.
Hmm.
So typical of Katie, she just invented her own.
Uh-huh. And the one I remember in particular was that she called Leslie Hockham.
Yeah, we never knew why that was.
Well, I guess the idea was that Leslie would say, "How come?"
That might be
a
what
lot
it
of
was. Yeah,
times.
yeah,
So she started thinking that,
yeah,
well, that's her name, then she's
yeah,
Hockham.
yeah, yeah. That's right. Yeah, she's always been her own person. Well, all of you are really, if you really think about it,
Yeah,
all different, but all your own person.
yeah.
So, and any parent has to appreciate that they're not going to be just like you,
Uh-huh.
and you have to appreciate who they become because they're family.
Yeah. Well, so not long after this, I guess she gets pregnant again, and there was a miscarriage.
Yes, I remember that. Um, and the doctor and the miscarriage occurred at the hospital in Moscow,
Uh-huh.
Gritman,
Okay.
and the guy who was supposedly taking care of her, he was awful. Not related to pregnancies, but later on, when it came to breast cancer,
Oh,
uh, I wasn't paying attention back then because I was naive, and so we weren't getting. Your mom was having. She knew the history of breast cancer in her family,
yeah.
so she was having yearly tests and everything, and we weren't getting any reports on it. But I wasn't paying attention until one year the doctor says, uh, the what we saw in last year's tests, which I had no idea what it
Mhm.
was, is much bigger now in this year's test. And that's when oh man, I was so furious, and I was mad at myself
Uh-huh.
And from that point on, I never trusted doctors again. I made sure I got copies of everything that happened
Right.
because I didn't trust them.
Yeah.
But your mom paid the ultimate price for that, because that bout of breast cancer took a year and a half, but she didn't recover from it. So
Right. Well, as I remember, the story that I remember is that this miscarriage occurred on Christmas Eve.
that's correct. That's and then yeah, that's right. And I remember the story I used to tell everybody. And
Uh-huh.
I said, so my wife had a miscarriage on Christmas Eve, and she got out of the hospital about 1 in the morning, and the other kids were all sleeping, and she filled all the stockings before they woke up.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, I was just, totally amazed.
Yeah.
Uh, well, I think a lot of that was because her own childhood, she had none of that.
Yeah.
And so she always wanted to make it up with her own kids. Now, grandma, you remember her Aunt Dorothy,
Uh-huh.
they would always go over to her house, and grandma always had something like a big stocking or something for your mom, but there was nothing at home.
Right.
uh,
Right. Hmm. So yeah, I remember looking through her journals um, a few years ago, and she never wrote about the miscarriage. She was writing in the journal, and then she just
Stopped right, yeah, yeah,
stopped writing for about
yeah,
6 months.
yeah, yeah,
And then when she started writing again, she was pretty depressed, but she never mentioned the
yeah,
miscarriage or talked about it.
yeah. Well, I can't remember how old the fetus was when she miscarried, but pretty young, like
Yeah.
3 months or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And your mom had, and it came from her father, I'm sure, guilt. There was always guilt about everything. Like if she had a miscarriage, it must have been her fault somehow.
Uh-huh.
And she was so hard on herself. Um,
So yeah, then it comes to 1979.
yeah,
So, by this point, Paul's getting to be 14, 15 years old.
yeah, yeah. He was born in '64, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So the kids are getting older.
yeah,
You've got Katie's about 2 years old,
yeah,
and mom's pregnant with me.
yeah, yeah. And your brother started. So we had police come to the door one day when your brother was like a teenager, 14, 15, and he had this Moscow High jacket he always wore, and his nickname was Thumpy,
Uh-huh.
Thompy. And the police come to the door and says, I don't know what they said about something about Thumpy. And of course, we knew he had this jacket, and we said, "What's this all about?" Well, he and his buddies were. There was I can't remember, some kind of a hot tub place where people were naked in the hot tub,
Uh-huh.
and it was outdoors. And Paul and his buddies were always climbing on the fence to stare at the naked women.
Right.
And so he was pretty embarrassed about that, because they called the police on him because they saw his jacket. So
Okay.
that's all they knew. So that ended that part.
What else do you remember about Paul as a teenager? I remember a story about uh that he like punched a hole in the wall at one point.
Yeah, I can't remember why. Now that you bring it up, I vaguely remember that incident, but I don't remember why or the
Well, he
time
was like,
around it.
I seem to remember he was arguing with you about something.
It was what? He was mad at me?
Yeah.
Oh, he was always mad at me.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably right.
Uh-huh.
Well, your mom was hardly a disciplinarian.
Hmm.
And that's always bad in a family, because then one person becomes the disciplinarian, and it's really not healthy because the kids begin looking at the disciplinarian as the bad guy,
Uh-huh.
and the mom is the good guy, or vice versa. And it's not a healthy thing, to have that happen like that. So
Right. Well, so around this time, then you made the decision to take that sabbatical at Stanford.
Say that again.
Around this time, you made the decision to take the sabbatical at Stanford.
Yeah, well, it's Stanford Research Institute,
Uh-huh.
which was not part of Stanford,
Okay.
but they had working agreements with them.
Okay.
And I think the guy who started it was a Stanford graduate, and that's why they called it that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to do that?
What was I doing there?
Or yeah, and why did you decide to do it?
I wanted to, that's about the time I had been into fluid mechanics. You know, I got my doctorate. Gordon Bope was my major prof.
Uh-huh.
And we were doing what was called magnetohydrodynamics. Have I ever talked to you about that at all?
Not much.
Okay. Well, the idea is it would be a way of, like, if you had a fluid that was moving, you know, being pumped maybe,
Uh-huh.
and the fluid moved between the poles of a magnet,
Yeah.
you could generate electricity.
Okay.
And about that time, people began to look for alternative sources for everything because we were, you know, there was a lot of worry about running out of electricity and all that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
So we weren't doing that particular thing, but we were trying to study how the fluid behaved when it went through a magnetic field. So we had basically a salt solution. It wasn't salt, potassium hydroxide, which is pretty corrosive, and that made water electrically conductive. And then I had this big 2-ton permanent magnet that was on. It took us like a day to move it from one lab into another.
Okay.
And we were doing fluid mechanics research. We had developed when I did my doctorate a way to put a laser into a duct that was transparent, and as long as it was electrical conducting, you could measure the velocity. So we could actually focus the laser all the way across the duct. And I don't know that you know this or not, but when a fluid moves through a pipe, the velocity is zero at the walls, right?
Okay.
And the velocity is maximum in the center of the duct. And so if you plotted the velocity across the cross section, it would look like a parabola.
Okay.
With the high point being in the middle of the duct. So we were doing research by actually measuring the velocity profiles in this. And we had a lot of publications on it. But I realized soon thereafter that there was no real long-term future once I decided to stay in academia in doing that kind of work, because there was nothing to do really. And that's when I went into catalysis. And the way I did that was to take a sabbatical down at Stanford Research Institute. And I was working for this real yo-yo. Well, I'll tell you some stories about him. I can't even remember his name now.
Okay.
But what an ego. Oh my God.
Well, before you launch into that, we have to wrap up this.
Oh yeah,
installment.
40-minute thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Take a 5-minute break.
Yeah. We'll take a break and then we'll get on to the story about
Okay.
yo-yo.
Remind me
that
of
you
where
worked
I'm
for.
at because I'll forget.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.